a career in radio until after I got into college. And the thing that really got me interested was actually working on the side at a college radio station. I did take a couple of journalism courses in college, but my major was in mass communications. It was actually not until after I'd been in the business for 11 years that I went back to NYU and did a master's degree in journalism then, which was actually a much more interesting time to do it than it would have been earlier. I've worked for 3 radio operations in my career. I started in Sanford. That was my first job. I was there about a year and a half. Then I spent about 10 years at WPOR Radio, part of a 4-person news team that was very aggressive. Learned an awful lot there. I have been with Maine Public Radio since about the summer of 1990, and I've been anchoring morning edition for them since September of 1992, which means it's now 26 years. Which is a really scary number. Anyway, actually, the scarier number is that as of the end of last August, I've now been in the business 40 years, even. So that's kind of my background in a nutshell.
Mo, how about yours?
I was a newspaper major at the Newhouse School at Syracuse University. I got my first professional job in Los Angeles at an auto industry business magazine. Writing about sales and marketing. Went from there to the LA Daily News on their business staff. Came to Maine in 1984. Became the first business writer at the Journal Tribune in Biddeford. Then became the business editor there. Then became the feature editor there. Eventually became the city editor there, spent about 19 years working in Biddeford, took a job as managing editor at the Forecaster in 2004, and I've been there almost 15 years now. I've been the editor and the executive editor for most of that time, and we publish 4 Forecaster editions a week. We also publish the American Journal in Westbrook and the Lakes Region Weekly up in the Lakes Region, essentially covering about 3/4 of Cumberland County. And like Irwin, it's been too many decades in the business.
So we'd like to have a sense from you on the decision-making process on what goes on the air, what goes in the newspaper. So I don't know how you want to do that. Can you take us through a typical day or a typical week and how you reach those decisions? It can't be your decision alone, is it? You're working with others?
No. I rely on our staff to sort of set the agenda every week. We have a staff, if you include the Lakes Region and the American Journal, we have a staff now of 8 reporters who are responsible for covering their town and municipal beats. Every Friday morning, we have a staff meeting where we discuss what our news budget is going to be for the following week. Of course, there's an old saying that anything your editor sees on his way to work is news. So I do assign things that cross my desk or that seem interesting to me. But we essentially rely on the reporters to set the agenda each week, and they know what our mission is, which is local news and writing for a local audience, which means we're heavy on local government coverage, we're heavy on local school coverage, feature stories, people stories, and we try to stay in that niche, although nothing is really set in stone. I mean, if something sounds like a good story and something we can do, we'll do it. No day is like the next or like the previous, basically.
Tell me before we go to Irwin. Tell me what you think. What if it's something sounds like a good story? What does that mean?
Well, I think it means, is it something that our readers are gonna want to read, and maybe even if it isn't, it is something that people need to know. Is it going to inform them? Is it going to challenge them? Is it going to entertain them? And there are other little technical things that go into consideration too, in terms of presentation. You know, can we get a good photo to go with a story? How well can we play it in print or on the web? What different elements, you know, is there video possible? All kinds of things that go into the decision making.
So it sounds like it could be a hard news story, it could be a soft news
Yeah.
story, depends upon the story.
Yeah.
Irwin, same question to you, please.
Yeah. And it's actually interesting to have the two of us here because part of our process is very similar. We actually have a weekly news meeting that I will miss today at 11 o'clock on Friday mornings, where we talk about things that may be coming up in the next week, stories that people are working on. We have kind of 3 people that are kind of serving as kind of our top editors. We generally, as a new staff, will furnish them with ideas, pitches for stories. And so in that respect, it works exactly the same. And of course, from time to time, too, our news director or his assistants will see things that they think are interesting. What's different for us is our audience. Mo was talking about the fact that they're interested in local news because that's what they do. They produce papers that have circulation in relatively confined areas. I'm working for a statewide radio network. So we tend to look at things through that filter. The question we sometimes like to ask is, does anybody in Fort Kent really care about this story? Because we do reach up there. But of course, the news really can vary from day to day. So when it comes to, on a daily basis, what stories we're going to run, the 2 screens that I usually use, I ask myself, is this story either important or is it interesting? An important story. In the last week or so, we've heard that the electric generation costs, for both major utilities in the state, are going to go largely up because the standard offer is going to go up. That's an important story. It affects everybody, pretty much, and it's something people will really want to know. And then the other stories are the stories that are a little more interesting. I'm actually not sure where the story yesterday about the change in the medical marijuana laws falls. That kind of falls into both of those areas a little bit. It's kind of important. On the other hand, it's kind of interesting to a lot of folks. But, you know, there are interesting stories. There's one that I gave really short mention to because it happened actually in New Hampshire the other day, and it was cute. It's a woman who turned 104, and she lives down in near New Hampton, New Hampshire. And she apparently liked to go to this diner, so her relatives packed her up and took her to this diner to celebrate her birthday. The diner is called the 104 Diner because it's on Route 104 in New Hampshire. Interesting, you know? Exactly. I know that's going to get that kind of response from an audience, so it's worth doing as a little.
So again, you, like Mo, some soft news stories, some hard news, whatever you think the audience is interested in.
Yep.
All right. The other principle that these students learned is that the media is a commercial enterprise. You're not doing it just because you're good guys, although you both happen to be, but you're the newspaper, the Forecaster's free, Mo, and can we talk about the business end of public radio?
Yeah, I can talk about it kind of in both cases.
Okay.
Because I spent about a dozen years working in commercial radio, and you're right, there is the commercial side of it,
Yeah.
no question. And frankly, the other thing about public radio, although our funding model is somewhat different, it's actually moved a lot closer to the commercial model in recent years because we have become a more mass communication medium. When public radio began in the 60s, it was really begun as kind of an alternative medium, and it would do anything that it really thought was interesting and that was somehow unserved on the radio, and it led to a lot of really weird stuff. But increasingly especially in the last 20 years, the audience for public radio has grown large. There are some kind of technical reasons related to the law and what Congress has done with public media that have driven that, but nonetheless, we now reach a very large audience. And as a result, we behave a lot more like a commercial radio station. We kind of count on that audience staying large because that becomes important to our funding. Both because we draw listener contributions, but also because we get, I'm going to guess somewhere around a quarter of our budget comes from what we call underwriter announcements, which are really, really short form commercials for commercial businesses. And what they are willing to pay us is dependent on the size of our audience. So, you know, that becomes a consideration.
For many of the students here, this is the first time they've studied this. How do you know the size of your audience?
We do at least on the radio side for us, it's a rating service. Traditionally, they've actually sent out twice a year for about 12 weeks. They send out diaries, ask people to record what radio stations they listen to. They then tally and extrapolate those numbers. Increasingly, I think we are beginning to work, I think the rating agencies are beginning to work towards more electronic monitoring of radio usage as they have for TV. But and then we get the results back. And it tells us what we know, which is, among other things, that we reach about, in a typical week, Maine Public Radio reaches about 200,000 people. Typical morning, my audience is peaking at maybe 20 to 30,000 people at any given moment. So,
Mr. Mehlsak, same question. You're a nonprofit enterprise,
Well,
aren't you?
no, we're for profit.
Oh.
We're strictly advertiser supported.
Okay.
The paper obviously is free. You all see it in the supermarket or the variety stores and whatnot. So we survive strictly on advertising revenue. In terms of knowing the size of our audience, the only way we can do that is really by counting newspapers. We know that we print or distribute, let's say, 90,000 copies a week, and we get back 15 or 20,000, so we know that our distribution is about 70 or 75,000 a week. Of course, it goes up and down. It's not an exact science, because people obviously pick up more than one copy. That sometimes occasionally, if they don't like something in the paper, they pick up 50 copies because they don't want other people to see it, and that can be a problem. But it's an inexact science, and we do, we try to keep the advertisers happy in terms of letting them know that people are picking up the paper, and that the product that they're putting their ads in is something that people are going to use for more than just lining the birdcage each week.
So is the forecaster's way to keep the size of the audience or grow it just good stories?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously the ad staff has its own programs and techniques, but for the most part, we rely on the reputation of the paper and on staying true to our mission, and true to what we know we do well. We're also now, I think everybody knows that within the last year and a half, most of the state's print newspapers have come under single ownership, and we're now part of that. We went from being independent. In the time I've been there, we've gone from being independent to being owned by the Sun Media Group, which is the Sun Journal in Lewiston, to now being part of Maine Today Media, which puts it creates, it's sort of a double-edged sword. It makes it a little bit confusing in terms of who we're actually competing with, but it also provides us with the resources that an organization like Maine Today can provide.
Who do you think your competition is today?
As far as I'm concerned, our competition is still the Press Herald, even though they're a sister publication. Our competition, to a lesser degree, is the Times Record in Brunswick, the daily paper up there. There are a couple of other weeklies in the region that we feel like we compete with, and it varies kind of depending on the story also.
This is a shortened class, so we only have time for a few more questions here, but can we talk for a few minutes about the future of the media? So, I don't know how many people in this room read the Forecaster or listen to MPBN. A lot of students today, I think, are getting their news from this device. How is MPBN reacting to planning for the future of media?
Well, we're already putting out. We're moving to the electronic platforms, or we're preparing more product for the electronic platforms because we know that's where people are going to go. Although I must say, we continue to kind of watch that, and we find, frankly, to our surprise, that the overwhelming majority of people who still engage with us on radio and television. over-the-air radio and television. But that, we know that will change. So we already, a lot of our news programming is available online. We're starting to produce podcasts. We're actually starting to aggregate podcasts on our website. You may have, if you've been listening in the last couple of weeks, we've been doing some promotions about that, our so-called podcast shortlist. And that's all designed to, you know, make sure that as people go looking for some of this material, they try to do it through us. They see, hopefully see us, continue to see us as a trusted source for media, whatever that may come to be going forward.
And how about the print version versus the electronic version?
Most of our audience is still in print. Again, we publish 6 papers. They're all distributed Wednesday, Thursday, Friday during the week. What I think a lot of people don't know about us is that 90 to 95% of what we run in print is available on our websites, probably at least a day, sometimes 2 or 3 days before it's in print. The website is free. It's one of the only Maine Today media websites that's not behind a paywall, which is good for us, but it also limits the amount of sharing we can do with the daily papers because they are behind paywalls.
Mm-hmm.
So if we were sharing their stories, they'd be losing money.
Yeah.
So we're at a disadvantage there. But we still have a web-first mentality, with the exception of sometimes stories that we think we have exclusively, perhaps, that we want to hold off the website until the day they're in print, so that somebody else can't see the story and beat us before we get the paper out, because the paper remains our largest method for getting the product to the reader, and that's where the advertising money is.
All right, so I think we've gotten to the gist of it. Those of you guys listening, you've heard some stuff now. Do you have questions about either print or radio or the web? Anything for these folks? Go ahead, Matt.
So if you were, like, which would you prefer more? Being able, and I'm actually asking Mr. Mehlsak, how do you pronounce it?
Mehlsak.
Mehlsak, okay, I pronounced that correctly. Would you rather continue to sell paper copies, or would you like your just all of the news to be on the internet and media?
People have been predicting the demise of print journalism for years now. And I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. I think there are still too many people out there, too many readers, for whom the experience of reading a print product is part of the attraction. The ability to flip through pages and perhaps be surprised by what you find on page 3 or page 5, rather than going to a website where you're generally looking for a specific story, and once you've found it, you jump off into something else because a link or an ad draws your attention, somewhere else or to some other site. I don't think it's. I don't want to say that I don't think it's ever going to happen, because I think eventually, as your generation and the generations behind you become more of the population, there is going to be a greater need to find a digital medium that works for news publishers. But I'm still committed to print. I still read the Press Herald paper every morning, even though I can open it up on my phone if I want to. But I do keep their websites open on my computer during the day. I've got 2 Twitter accounts running on my computer all day long. It just becomes another part of the mix for us, but I think print is going to remain part of that mix for a while.
You had a question as well?
Where do you start if you want to become a journalist?
I started on my high school paper, writing sports. I worked on the school paper at Syracuse. I majored in newspaper in college. Unfortunately, I don't think the opportunities are there now that existed when I was your age. But I think there are opportunities. I think you have to be a bit more nimble than I ever was. You have to be able to write. You have to be able to do voiceovers and radio. You have to be able to handle video and take photos. I had a little of that, but my concentration as a student, as somebody learning the profession, was in writing. So I think you have to be a jack of all trades these days. But I would definitely look for opportunities. Is it the school paper? Is it becoming a correspondent for a paper like the Forecaster? Is it doing freelance work if you can? I'm not sure about the radio path these days.
I think that a lot of it is very similar. I mean, I would still look for, it doesn't happen so much at high school levels, but there are still opportunities at colleges for student-run media operations or media operations that involve students. And if you get there, I would spend as much time at that as I could. I mean, that's where I learned most of what I needed to know. It wasn't actually from my academic courses, although I enjoyed those too. I do think there seem to be, to me, more opportunities for formal internships these days. That's something to look into. We actually even now have a couple of paid internships we offer every summer for college students from Maine. So the key is though, and I think it's the point that Mo was starting to make, is absolutely right. The key is to do it. Find an outlet to do stuff and to practice, because these are crafts. Writing is a craft, even photography is a craft. You'll learn the most by doing stuff and then having people look at what you've done and taking the criticism. It'll be as valuable, I think, as any time you'll spend in class.
What I would add too is, besides doing it, you have to read.
Yeah.
For newspapers and even for news in general, you have to be a news consumer, both in terms of knowing what's happening, but also in terms of sort of looking at how it's done and trying to analyze the way things are written. Be an aggressive consumer of the product.
And see me or Libby Palanza afterwards. She's the editor of the Cape Elizabeth Television Club. We'd love to have you. Anyone else, by the way, if you want to join, we'd love to have you. Listen, we, in September, Mr. Ash and I took a group of students over to South Portland High School where they had a media panel, and the executive editor of the Press Herald, Cliff
Scheckman.
said, social media will be the downfall of democracy. And a lot of the students in this room who were there bristled, and I think one of them offered a pretty restrained rebuttal. But Mo, I just heard you say you've got your Twitter account open while you're on the job. Explain that to us so that we understand that better, please.
Well, keep in mind, we're again a small local weekly. We don't have wire services at our, that are available to us. We're not members of the Associated Press. We're not really, while we're paying attention, we're not on a day-to-day basis covering national issues. Twitter, for me, is basically my wire service. I follow dozens of news organizations and journalists to keep on top of what's happening throughout the day. I don't have the benefit of AP feeding me things all day long, letting me know what's going on in Washington or in Augusta. So it's my wire.
But nonetheless, I think what Cliff was worried about is what people have called clickbait. You're going to tried and true sources that are the gatekeepers.
Right. And it's, a lot, you still have to sort of sit through some of the flotsam and jetsam to find the good stuff sometimes. Yeah. But as far as I'm concerned, it's right now it's the best way for me to stay on top of things throughout the day.
Irwin.
Actually, I have access to the AP, and I find, at least in Maine, I stay on top of things better through my Twitter account than through the AP. But that's neither here nor there. The thing I want to say about social media, and I'll respectfully disagree slightly with Cliff,
Yeah.
who I think is a great journalist
Yeah.
and a good thinker. But a lot of times, it's not about the media. It really is about people. You know, all the things that people complain about social media, about the fact that it's being used for propaganda, that it you know, carries falsehoods, etc. These are not new problems. We actually have the names for them because people have put false information in print. They've published propaganda, they've distributed propaganda via radio and television and movie screens. I mean, it's, in the end, what this is about is what social media represents, I think, is a new challenge to all of us to be media literate. That's what we're going to have to figure out, and we're probably, because these technologies are so new, we're probably all a little behind the curve at this point, but we will have to catch up, and we will be able to catch up, I think. And eventually, all of us will learn where the trusted news sources are, and they, you know, some of them will be the traditional organizations like Mo's, like mine, some of them will be different. I'll just give you one short example. I was born and raised in New York City, and I love the place, and I still kind of follow stuff from there. And there is a guy, he's a lawyer in Brooklyn by the name of Benjamin Kabak, and about a little over a decade ago, he started writing a blog about the construction underway on the 2nd Avenue subway. Someday, if you want to read a good story, read about the 2nd Avenue subway in New York. But over time, he expanded that to talk and to some degree to opine about the workings of mass transit around New York City. The guy is really sharp and really on top of things. The New York Times now quotes him as a source from time to time. And so his information is, while it's somewhat opinionated, and I understand that, I find him an extremely interesting read because I'm interested in those issues and he clearly does deep thinking about them. So that's something that would not have been available, frankly, once upon a time before the internet, because he just would have been an attorney. He might have talked about this stuff with his friends, and the rest of us would never have known it. So I don't think the technology is bad. It's a question of what we do with it and how we as consumers of news use it.
Thank you. We'd love to stay and talk for another half hour, but these guys have got to go into a class. Would you please join me in thanking our guests for coming back today?